Hello everyone, my name is Jason and you're watching Netminder Review. Because the hockey season has been on hold, I haven't been doing any power ranking videos, obviously, and I'm kind of missing them. So I decided to do a power ranking video, but a little bit of a different kind of one. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be power ranking the top 10 goaltenders from the 1990s. Now, this includes the 90-91 season all the way up through the 99-2000 season. And yes, I'm wearing my Patrick Waugh shirt, but don't let that confuse you. That does not necessarily mean that Patrick Waugh is number one on this list, okay? So keep on watching so that you can find out who is. If not Waugh. It could be, but I'm not promising that it is. Anyway, I have, like I said, I've been missing doing the power ranking videos, so I came up with this idea to power rank the top 10 goaltenders from the 1990s. And I based it completely on regular season statistics. So nothing that you're going to see in this video has anything to do with playoffs or Stanley Cups. But I think you would agree when this list is over. Well, I mean, not everybody's going to agree on anything, right? But I think many of you will agree that when this list is over, that even if I had factored in playoffs and Stanley Cups, that the list probably wouldn't change a whole lot. But this is based on regular seasons. So we have 10 regular seasons here to account for. Now, what I did was I used a point system where I graded the goaltenders from the 1990s on various criteria. And I gave them points for which of those criteria they met each year and how well they met it or where they ranked on those particular statistics that I was looking at. So as I go through the names and put them on the board, I'm also going to put up the point total that they earn. Now, what you'll see is that to an extent, or maybe you won't see this, but let me explain it nonetheless. Goaltenders who played all 10 of these seasons had the opportunity to earn more points, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they did. And there are some goaltenders on this board, or that will be on this board, that did not play all 10 seasons. Some of them came into the NHL somewhere in the 1990s, or even if they played all 10 seasons, their first few seasons, they played so few games that it had no bearing on these numbers. So I'll go over these names and the point totals that I gave them, and you'll be able to see just how dramatic of a difference there was between number 10 and number 1. Now, while I'm only ranking 10 on this board, there were actually 59 goaltenders that scored points. So I'm only putting the top 10 point total goaltenders on this board according to my system. All right? So out of the 59 goaltenders that earned points according to my system for their play at some point in the 1990s or throughout the 1990s, we're just going to take a look at the top 10. And let's get started. So number 10 on the list, Felix Potvin. Felix Potvin, according to my point system, earned 92 points. Now, it is possible that if I had factored in playoffs, he might have gone a little higher. After all, if I remember correctly, the Maple Leafs with Felix Potvin in net did reach the conference finals 3 years in a row, though they never did push through to the Stanley Cup finals in any of those. And I did a video recently where I talked about my all-time favorite goaltenders to watch. Felix Potvin, he was on that list. I loved Felix Potvin. Had a big poster of Felix Potvin on my wall. Had posters of lots of goalies on my wall when I was a teenager, but Felix Potvin was one of my favorites. He was just a treat to watch, so acrobatic, so fast, so athletic. He was really awesome. I was a big Maple Leafs fan at that time, and even got to, in 1994, went to Maple Leaf Gardens, didn't get to see a game. It was in August, so it wasn't hockey season, but got to go inside and see Maple Leaf Gardens. I just really regret that I never got to see a game there. But anyway, at number 10, all through the 1990s, the 10th ranked goaltender, according to my point system, with 92 points, Felix Potvin. Let's look at number 9. Coming in at number 9 is Andy Moog, who spent the better part of the 90s with, let's see, if I'm not mistaken, was he with Edmonton any of the 90s? He was Boston, he was with Dallas. I don't remember every team. 1990s was a long time ago and my memory's not so great. But anyway, Andy Moog comes in at number 9 with 105 points. And I will admit, though I always liked Andy Moog, I'm not saying I was a big Andy Moog fan, I was a little surprised that he ended up ranking this high. And again, this is totally unbiased. It was sheerly looking at statistics, various numbers from all of these goaltenders from the 1990s. Now, it does help for Andy Moog that he played, if I'm not mistaken, the entire decade. So he was able to earn points according to my scoring system, I think, in almost every year of the decade. So that definitely boosted him up a bit. But coming in at number 9, Andy Moog. So let's take a look at number 8 from the 1990s. So at number 8 with 134 points, Mike Richter. New York Rangers, Mike Richter, hero of the 1994 Stanley Cup Finals, although again, Stanley Cup Finals, playoffs not being factored in here. But Mike Richter from the New York Rangers. And you can see here, if you look, there's a pretty big point jump between Moog at 105 and Mike Richter at 134. And Richter really was a treat to watch. You know, during the 1990s, I was a big Vancouver Canucks fan. So when they lost that Stanley Cup in 94 to the Rangers, I was truly devastated. And therefore, during the 90s, I really didn't like Mike Richter. I was not a Richter fan, and I pretty much rooted against him all the time. But now that that's, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, I can get past all of those biases of my young fandom of the Canucks. And I can say, that really, looking back, Richter was a treat to watch. He was a heck of a goaltender. And, I'm sure that in different circles, he probably gets thrown around as being, one of the best goaltenders, one of the better goaltenders that has played. But, he's not going to be confused with the best goaltender of all time, but he definitely deserves to be in the conversation when people are talking at least about elite goaltenders, and especially elite goaltenders of his era. So there's number 8. Let's take a look at number 7. So coming in at number 7 with 136 points is Tom Barrasso. Only 2 more points than Mike Richter. I think if you had to argue who was the better goaltender realistically, Richter or Barrasso, you'd probably go with Richter over Barrasso. The only reason that I have Barrasso ranked ahead of Richter is because this is just purely a point system. Barrasso was booking points all through the 90s, where Richter really didn't start to show up on my point ranking system until I think it was around 93, somewhere in that range. So he loses a couple of years of eligibility for booking points according to my system. He loses a couple years to Barrasso. Now, that being said, if we were looking at overall playoffs and everything else, certainly somebody could make the argument, well, Barrasso does have 2 Stanley Cups, which again, I didn't factor that in to Mike Richter's 1 Stanley Cup, which I also did not factor in. Of course, someone might come back with the argument, yeah, but the team in front of Barrasso was a little bit more of an offensive powerhouse than the team in front of New York, although, got a squeaky car going by, sorry if you can hear that, although the Rangers certainly were a fantastic team. Either way you look at it, I'm not factoring in playoffs or Stanley Cup. Barrasso, probably just because he had more years to book points, comes up just a tiny bit higher over Richter, though I will admit, if you told me that I had to build a team around Richter or Barrasso, I would choose Mike Richter, but Barrasso had one heck of a decade, and I think that he very much deserves to be up here. The points say that he deserves to be up here according to my system, and I also think if you go back and just look at the eye test from the 1990s, he also deserves to be up here for that reason as well. So, now that he's out of the way, let's take a look at number 6. Okay, so we have a pretty big point jump from number 7, Tom Barrasso with 136 points, to number 6, Curtis Joseph, 172 points. And I think we could also make the argument that this line right here between 5 and 6 on this board is where we start going from talking about really good goaltenders to Hall of Fame candidate goaltenders, Hall of Fame quality goaltenders. Curtis Joseph, if you didn't watch Curtis Joseph in the 1990s, maybe you were too young, maybe you weren't a hockey fan yet, you weren't even born. Curtis Joseph was, in my opinion, a pretty significant step up from the guys below him. Moog, very positionally sound, not all that flashy, not going to make a lot of highlight reels. Potvin, going to make all the highlight reels. Positionally good, but not amazing, but short-lived. Potvin's career really, his amazing years were only about, 4 or 5. Richter, very positionally sound and certainly had a highlight reel capability in him. Barrasso, kind of the same. But I think there's just a massive jump when we go up to Curtis Joseph. Curtis Joseph built a highlight reel career over a much longer period of time. And I'm not saying, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Barrasso played a very long career, but Joseph was, I think, just a cut above these other guys for a longer period of time. You can always make that argument that in their very best year, any one of these guys could have been, the best, right? But Joseph was one of the best for longer than I think these guys were. Joseph's years with the Blues, I saw firsthand, being a St. Louis guy, going to a lot of Blues games in the 1990s. I saw a lot of Curtis Joseph, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, hometown guy in that sense. Not that he grew up here. Obviously grew up in Canada, played his college hockey, Wisconsin, was a Badger. But, he will always hold a special place in the hearts of St. Louis Blues fans. With most Blues fans, if they're old enough, and you ask them, who goes on the Mount Rushmore of Blues goaltenders, you have Mike Liut, you have Curtis Joseph. Probably now you could argue Bennington because he won a Stanley Cup, and then you could probably go back and say either, Jacques Plante or Glenn Hall. I think most would say Glenn Hall. But Curtis Joseph was just a treat to watch. And if you don't know a lot about Curtis Joseph for whatever reason, then go back, watch some highlight reels of him. Man, he was fantastic. But let's move on to number 5. Okay, now, I'll admit, if I were going to argue with myself, this might be where I would argue. I might argue that I would have John Van Beesbroek at 6 and Joseph at 5. But I tried to go with a non-biased point scoring system based on how they performed in the 90s. And it came out that Van Beesbroek earned 189 points according to my system, compared to Joseph's 172. But Van Beesbroek was really, really fantastic. Van Beesbroek had one heck of a time with Florida, and he was a fantastic goaltender for the Rangers, only pushed out because somebody better, Mike Richter, at the time, pushed him out. But Van Beesbroek went on to Florida, and I think proved that he still deserved to be considered in the same conversation as Mike Richter. That he while giving up that net to Richter in New York, that he still was really every bit as good, at least on his best days. So Van Beesbroek, having also booked points according to my system throughout the whole decade, as opposed to Mike Richter losing a little bit of time early in the decade to not have playing time, not have enough playing time there to book any points. Van Beesbroek comes in at number 5. And probably the way I just said all that, you're gonna comment on here and go, you're torn. You don't even like your own board. But again, I'm trying to make this completely unbiased and completely statistical based. So yes, I'll admit, if my biases were coming in, I think I would have Joseph ahead of Van Beesbroek and maybe Richter ahead of Barrasso. But I'm really trying to just do this based on sheer statistics, no biases, no personal preferences. So coming in at number 5, John Van Beesbrook. And by the way, if you're watching this and you're a big fan of Van Beesbrook, make the case for him other than the statistics. He was really good, I know, but I think looking back, I just like Joseph better, being a big Joseph fan, and I like Richter a little bit better. But the numbers bear out based on sheer statistics. Van Beesbrook, number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Now we make a massive point jump. So John Van Beesbrook, who comes in at number 5, has 189 points. Moving up to Martin Brodeur at number 4, we go all the way up to 248 points. And Martin Brodeur is 4th on this list, and I don't think too many people will make a big argument that he should be higher. You could make an argument that he was better than maybe one or two of the guys in front of him. And I'm sure if you're a huge Brodeur fan, which I am a big Brodeur fan, but if like he's your all-time favorite goaltender ever, you're probably going to argue he should be number 1. But remember, Brodeur he was drafted in 1990. He didn't really come into the league to any significant degree till about 94. So he really doesn't start booking points in my system until about 1994, 95. Now think about that. He loses about 4 seasons of point availability for the way that I calculated this. And yet he not only still comes in at number 4, but he comes in 248 points, significantly further ahead of number 5. So Martin Brodeur, I mean, obviously he's going to go down as one of the top goaltenders of all time. There will always be those who argue that he is the best goaltender of all time. I'm willing to say that it's a close tie for second, maybe a 3-way tie for second, Brodeur being in there. And I'll tell you in a minute who I think is number 1 all time. Martin Brodeur, by any way that you look at it, was just amazing. He comes in 4th here because partly because he loses some seasons of point availability, okay? But 248 points, one of the greatest of all time, and here we have hit, no doubt about it, Hall of Fame status. In fact, Brodeur and the 3 guys ahead of him are all Hall of Famers. So if you know your Hall of Fame history, you can probably guess which 3 guys are going to be in these slots, though you may not know the order. But based on the statistics and based on a point scoring system, an unbiased point scoring system, Martin Brodeur, number 4. Let's take a look at number 3. Number 3, right here, Patrick Roy. I said at the beginning, Patrick Roy may not be number 1, and he's not. Patrick Roy is number 3 with 292 points. So he's close to 50 points ahead of Brodeur at number 4, but again, Roy had the entire decade to book points in my system, whereas Brodeur, because he was not in the league the first few years of the 90s, did not. Patrick Roy wins the Stanley Cup in 93 with the Canadiens, which of course is not factored in here. And then he goes to Colorado and wins, 2 there, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, Patrick Roy was the difference largely for the Colorado Avalanche. I think one could argue that the 93 team that he won the Stanley Cup with was not necessarily the best team in the NHL on paper. They were very strong, but it was Patrick Roy's goaltending that gets them there. It's the same way with the Avalanche. I think the Avalanche team was better than the 93 Canadiens team, but again, it's Patrick Roy that puts them over the top. All through his career, Patrick Roy took teams that were anywhere from good to really good and made them spectacular to amazing. And the statistics bear it out. The wins, the goals against average, the save percentage, the shutouts, and other statistics all factored in, and they really just make it a no doubt. I don't think anybody who's watching this is going to be shocked that Roy is in the top 3, though some of you might be surprised that he's not higher. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised that he's not lower. Patrick Roy, one of the all-time best, definitely always belonging and actually in the argument for who is the best goaltender of all time. But when we look at it statistically throughout the 90s, just at the regular season, he comes in 3rd. Let's look at number 2. All right, I'm a St. Louis Blues fan. Always have been, always will be. Ed Belfour, Chicago Blackhawks. No, he didn't only play with the Chicago Blackhawks. I know he played with the Dallas Stars and others. But I will always think of Ed Belfour as that really frustrating, annoying goaltender for the Chicago Blackhawks that on more than one occasion sunk my St. Louis Blues. Although, I still remember that beautiful scene where Belfour was slamming his stick all over the crossbar because he lost to the Blues. But that's another story. Ed Belfour comes in with 329 points. Now, that's a big jump over Patrick Waugh, and that might be a surprise to some of you. When we look at Belfour statistically, he was leading in most statistical categories, or he was in the top few in most statistical categories on a number of years throughout the 1990s. Patrick Waugh was not always in the top in every statistical category, okay? But Belfour was regularly there from the beginning of the 90s all the way to the end. Belfour was really, as much as I hate to admit it, being a huge Blues fan and being anti-Blackhawks in every way because I'm a huge Blues fan, as much as I hate to admit it, Ed Belfour was all that in a bag of chips. What makes it even worse for me is that I'm not only a massive Blues fan, but I'm a huge Buffalo Sabres fan. So when we fast forward to the end of the decade, to that 1999 Stanley Cup final where the Sabres lose to Ed Belfour and the Dallas Stars, for me, Ed Belfour was a plague from the beginning of the 90s all the way through the end of the 90s, drove me insane, but he was an amazing goaltender. Any accolade that he gets, he deserves. And the reality is, when I hear people talk about the best goaltender of all time, I hear guys like Brodeur and Waugh thrown in there, but I don't usually hear Belfour. Now, maybe that's because I'm largely talking to St. Louis people and they just can't bear the thought of including him in the conversation. So I'm not really wanting to ask you if you're a Chicago fan, if you're a Dallas fan. I mean, chime in if you want to, but I really want to hear the thoughts of neutral site fans, okay? Like, what if you're a Tampa Bay fan? What if you're a Vancouver fan? What if you're a Pittsburgh fan? Although, if you're a Pittsburgh fan, you did beat the Blackhawks with Belfour in 92, right, in the Stanley Cup Finals. What if you're a Flyers fan? What do you guys think of Belfour? When you guys, who may be unbiased because he wasn't like the constant thorn in the side of your favorite teams, when you guys think of Ed Belfour, do you think of him as one of the greatest goaltenders of all time? Because as I really dove into these numbers, I have to admit I was a little bit surprised. I expected Belfour to be on this board and probably on this side of it. But I was a little surprised that his numbers were so good year after year after year. He was almost always one of the top statistical goaltenders in the NHL. Just an absolute gem of a performer in goal. I don't like him. I don't like it that I have to say these things, but I have to admit it. He was really good. And from now on, after looking at all this, when I'm in a conversation about who's the best goaltender of all time, I will at least swallow my pride and mention the man's name as much as it'll hurt me. But I will always say, as much as I was a huge Brodeur fan and a huge Waugh fan and other goaltenders too from other eras, I will always say that the person whom I'm about to put on the board is the best goaltender of all time, statistical and otherwise. So, who's number one? Here we go. When we talk about goaltenders who are not positionally sound, as a general rule, we're talking about goaltenders that are probably going to have short careers. Why? Because a goaltender who's not necessarily positionally sound, but relies completely on their athleticism and speed, is going, that goaltender is going to reach a point where his athleticism and speed are going to fade away. Guys like Brodeur and Waugh were able to be great late into their careers because they were so positionally perfect. They had great athleticism and great speed, but even in their later years when that began to fade away, they were still so positionally sound and so intelligent about the position that they could still be some of the best goaltenders in the NHL. Dominik Hasek was not what you would call a positionally sound goaltender. Nobody is ever going to go to a goaltending clinic and be played a tape of Dominik Hasek and told, do this. This is what you should do, what Dominik Hasek did. Dominik Hasek was the most unorthodox, peculiar, crazy, entertaining, highlight reel filling goaltender that has ever played hockey at any level, I'm sure. And if I'm wrong, then I really want to see some video of the guy who deserves those accolades more. Dominik Hasek is number one on this board. Statistically, the number one goaltender of the 1990s, even though he, like Martin Brodeur, didn't really start booking points in my system until a few years into the 1990s. If we check the statistics or put them aside and we just go with the eye test, well, it was definitely strange to watch. But Dominik Hasek found ways to keep pucks out of the net. And at the end of the day, that's really all a goaltender is supposed to do. Generally speaking, it's positional soundness that allows a goaltender to be great at that. But with Dominik Hasek, it was a whole different ballgame. He was the single most amazing goaltender I have ever seen. And for as long as I live, I cannot imagine any other goaltender ever coming along that in my mind will displace him. I will not only consider Dominik Hasek to be the greatest goaltender of the 1990s, but I will consider Dominik Hasek to be the greatest goaltender of all time. I have never seen anyone like him. I don't think I will ever see anyone like him again. And if I had to win, not me in goal, if I had to put money on a team to win one game, and I could pick one goaltender from the entire history of goaltending to win that one game, it would be Dominik Hasek. Dominik Hasek is my all-time favorite goaltender. Yes, I'm highly biased, but it was not my bias that put him here. He has 371 points compared to Belfour's 329. Or even if we drop all the way to number 10, we have Felix Potvin with just 92 points. Now, 92 points is a lot more. Remember, I said there were 59 goaltenders that earned points in my system. So 92 points is a whole lot more than a whole lot of them. But 371 points, and this point scoring system was completely based on unbiased statistical tracking. That was it, okay? None of my opinion factored into this. But Dominik Hasek, if my opinion had factored into this, would still have been number one because he was amazing. And I've said it in some of my other videos. If you're too young to know who Dominik Hasek is or to have ever seen him play, please do yourself a big favor. Go watch Dominik Hasek highlight reels. You will be amazed and you will be entertained like almost no other goaltender highlight reel will ever entertain you. And there are a lot of great goalies and a lot of great highlight reels out there. So let me bring this in closer for all of you so you guys can see it. Let's see there, right there. So you guys can see it all. There's our top 10 goaltenders of the 1990s, statistically speaking, graded and given points according to an unbiased point scoring, statistically based system. I hope you found this entertaining. I'd love your feedback. I'd love your comments. Let me know. Of course, keep in mind this was completely just math is all it was, but I didn't factor in every statistic that there is to factor in, and I tried to keep my biases out of it. So let me know when you think about goalies of the 1990s, does this make sense to you? Do you think that this is relatively logical? Would you move them around? Are there guys that you're going, why don't you have this guy on there? Why don't you have that guy on there? And I can tell you there were some guys that were just off the mark from being number 10. So number 11 and, 12, 13, I think really all the way through 15, even number 15, I think had point totals up in the 70s. And then it really starts to drop off from there. But anyway, let me know what you think. Please do hit like and please subscribe to this video. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day. Bye now.